I've never seen a tight hamstring yet. I don't expect I will ever see a tight hamstring. Position dictates function, right? And position a lot of the time is the thing that we need to look at. And for a lot of people, you're going to see an anterior tilt at the pelvis. So the pelvis at the front is kind of spilled forward. And that means that the back of the pelvis has gone up. So the attachment points of the hamstrings have gone further away from the knee. So the hamstrings have gotten a little bit longer there. And then people would say, okay, bend down to touch your toes, and I can't touch my toes, and I feel my hamstrings really tight, and they're tight all the time, and they're screaming at me. Well, of course they are. They're under stretch all of the time. So stretching the hamstring, even if that was not the case, okay, even if that was not the case, and maybe that isn't the case for some people, and the hamstrings are tight, then I would love for people to start asking the question, why are they tight? So why is my brain or my nervous system expressing excess tone in that area? And when we start to ask questions like why, then it doesn't tend to lead us to, my brain says that I'm going to tighten up that area. And the answer to that why is to stretch it and say, no, I don't want it to be tight. That's the thing that people don't usually ask, is why. And that if they did, they would probably not lead it to stretching is the answer. So if we ask why a muscle is tight, we'll probably say the brain is putting protective tone or protective tension there. And it's trying to, one, protect you, or two, kind of asking you to change something about your movement or your positioning. Probably movement, but these things kind of go hand in hand. So if I want to change something, I'm probably not going to say, I'm just going to stretch it and lengthen something that the brain is trying to keep tight. I'm going to say, I probably need to change how I move, change the positioning of my bones, and or make something stronger. So I'm either going to make my hamstring stronger or my quad stronger, or both. I'm going to improve how my pelvis moves so my hamstrings can lengthen and shorten. And I'm going to make sure that my rib cage and my whole spine can move quite well, so that when I move, it's not that I'm trying to use my erectors for everything, which are going to tighten again and kind of pull on that pelvis. So we've so many other answers that we can look at, but we just have to ask the question why first. And that's why we can change hamstring tightness in minutes usually, because we don't need to look at the muscle itself. A lot of the time we just ask the question, why is the brain expressing this tone there? And when we ask that question, we can change it, and we can have a better appreciation for the whole body, rather than just one muscle that would be tight for some phantom reason.
You mentioned strengthening the hamstrings. One heuristic that comes to mind, I want to know from your point of view if it makes sense or not. A tight muscle is a weak muscle. Does that make sense in general? Is it a valid kind of heuristic to use, or is it not necessarily?
Maybe not necessarily. And I appreciate the sentiment. Like, people will say that, and they're probably not far off when they say like a tight and weak. But not necessarily, I think, because strength again is granted by the brain. Now, obviously, there is a local muscle involvement here, and actually, like, if you have very, very little muscle mass, and basically, if you've come out of an ACL surgery, then and 6 weeks later your quad has wasted away, then strength is not really granted by the brain anymore. You're going to have to work your quad. But if I'm testing someone, doing a muscle test with someone on my table, and they can't resist me with their hamstring at all, then I can probably say, think about you being the strongest man in the world, and retest their hamstring, and it'll probably test strong. Or if it tests strong, I could probably say, think of the worst pain you've ever felt, or kind of plant some kind of thought into their mind, and the muscle will usually test weak. So strength and weakness is granted by the brain, and these are things that, like, it should be obvious to us. If we see a power lifter who has a good day or a bad day, and like nothing has changed at the level of the muscle, then something is changing here. Something is granting the strength or not granting the strength. So the same can be said for tightness and weakness. Really, are these things actually weak? Are they actually tight? Or again, is it the position that we're in, the leverage that the muscle has? So again, if I do this all the time. I'll test someone's hamstrings, test weak. If we get some movement into the rib cage and the pelvis, suddenly the pelvis sits in a slightly more neutral position. Test the hamstrings. Now they test strong. So I haven't done 6 weeks of hamstring curls. I've done 6 exhales, and now it's changed. So when you start to see this stuff again and again and again, and it's repeatable things, then you start to question where the strength is actually granted from.
Well, what's not the shelf life, maybe the half life of such interventions? Because you talk about being able to have those changes happen within minutes, but then, you know, if you retest someone 15 minutes later, is it still the case? 30 minutes later? So how do you make those things stick over time?
Yeah, you just have to train them. Usually you have to train. It's a really nice thing to see, and I appreciate that. Like, we're not looking for voodoo quick fixes, and that's stuff that I stay away from, in terms of, like, that's why I'm not a fan of muscle testing a whole lot. I'll use it a little bit, but it's just a very small part of my practice or my assessment. But I'm not basing my whole treatment on that type of thing. Whereas there's people who will test the muscle, say it's weak, and then they'll rub your eyebrow and then get you to blink 2 times with one eye, and then they'll test it and it'll test strong, and they'll say that that's your fix. Like, that's madness. You know, we need to give people something that they can actually go home and practice and train with. So there's a hell of a lot of that going on in the neurology world, and yes, it helps. It does help clients to understand that that the brain is kind of the king here, and there's changes happening, and changes can happen quickly. But if we're going to give them that as homework or hang their hat on that, then we're never going to actually make people stronger or move better. They're always just kind of having some kind of weird party piece that can help them feel better for a few minutes. So, for instance, like, I had a guy who was training. I think he was training to go into the Navy SEALs or something pretty intense. I think it was the SEALs, right? And doing online work with him over COVID. But the first session, so he's had knee pain for a year, right? And he has 6 months to get ready for this Navy SEALs challenge, which obviously is going to be absolute hell, right? And he has a lot of knee pain. And he'd done some online sessions with a guy in New York, and basically the guy's treatment for him was to do circles with his elbow, the opposite elbow, so his right elbow, and that helps his left knee pain go away. And so every single day he wakes up, he feels his knee is sore, he does some of these circles with his elbow, imagining that his elbow is his knee, and his knee pain goes away. But he has to repeat this every single day. And I think 6 weeks or a month of that, as part of the Navy SEALs training, is probably not going to go very, very well for him, right? So so when I talk about quick changes, like, it's just to appreciate that we can make changes, but we have to have some kind of training effect to back it up. And so that stuff is called, like, interlimb neurocoupling, or you know, just imagining that you're moving another body part or something like that. And honestly, I've seen that stuff work and people's pain actually go away for good. But I'm certainly not going to hang my hat on that and presume that that's going to be the case. I have seen it happen, but I'm very wary of anyone that promotes that as their whole approach. So if it's a breathing type of movement, and the pelvis, we can have a big impact on the rib cage and the pelvis. It's going to give me an insight into, okay, I think this is some of what my client wants, or their body is kind of crying out for. And I'm going to have a little bit of that, and I'm going to train that. And I would expect if they train that, then they would come back into me a week later, 3 weeks later, and I would go through my tests, and the tests would be still solid. So these changes will stick. It's just that we need to make sure that, just like anything, we're practicing them. We're not doing it once off and hoping that it changes for good. It's just showing us that there is change available there, and we can train this. And just like anything else, at some stage, we don't want to have to train it anymore. We want it to be there for us, and I don't have to think about this. So that, I think that's also what people kind of go down the breathing rabbit hole. They don't do enough of that, where actually I'm gonna stress the hell out of my clients. I'm gonna make these positions and challenges much harder and harder and harder, so that you become robust and you can access these movements when you go onto the field or go into your real world. Because these neuro changes that people see, as soon as you step outside the door and someone says boo to you, they're going to be gone, right? And I've seen that happen. I've heard stories about this where people even went to like and I don't want to knock FRC, but they've gone to an FRC seminar and someone showed just how much range they got internal rotation at their shoulder, and someone went up to them and said boo, and next thing they checked and their range was all gone. So again, another lesson for us, that the nervous system will grant or take away movement very quickly based on past events and how good it feels at the time. For me, it all comes back to, can I improve movement and can I make people stronger? And if you're not doing both of those, then probably nothing else matters.
Yeah, so just granting new ranges of motion is not enough. You then have to solidify those positions, like you said, train them up the loading, up the stress, so that those positions become kind of baseline positions again, and now you can kind of move forward instead of always having to come back to, oh, I need to do my breathing to just even be able to move to begin with, right?
Exactly. And even like, as you know, like some of that breathing stuff, it's very difficult. Like, it's not like, again, it's not like we're trying to be a yogi here, you know, or anything like that. It's very difficult, and we're trying to make changes that we can actually measure. So we can measure these changes based on, and I'm not trying to make changes for the sake of it, it's based on ranges that I think they need access to or would help their body. But at some point, I would love them to be able to go and do a front squat or some kind of a deadlift or whatever the movement is, and be able to use that movement to improve those ranges at the same time. So I can couple these together, and maybe I just have an inhale at a certain point in the movement and an exhale at a certain point of the movement, and that's what does it for me. And I don't have to always get someone to lie on the floor and do it. So that's the end goal for everyone. Just like the end goal for your gym training is, you want to up the load, you want to get people into very difficult positions. But at the start, maybe you need to lie them down and do a hamstring curl with them, or maybe you need to, you know, start with a goblet squat or whatever. So it's just making sure they've ticked the boxes along the way. And I think that's where people sometimes they fall into the trap of keeping people on very low level drills forever. And there's never enough stress there. And once you see someone who can kind of have a chat with you and they can look quite relaxed and do these positions quite easily, then you should know that it's time to move on and progress on and stress someone more.